This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
My new Trump fragrances are here. They make a great Christmas present. I've named them Fight, Fight, Fight because they represent winning. Get yourself a bottle and don't forget to grab one for your loved ones too. They'll thank you and they'll even smell good.
Quiet Riot.
Welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the weekend hair of the dog to our Thursday hangover. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. How are you doing, Alex? Are you sheltering from Storm Dara okay? It's blowing an absolute gale where I am.
Yeah, same here. And my windows are not as newly updated as yours. If listeners can hear thudding, that's the old Victorian windows where I am basically rattling around.
Now, listeners, we are very, very excited for Ask Us Anything, the session that we're holding tomorrow, if you're listening to this on Sunday, a Sunday school. Monday, the 9th of December at 6 p.m. We're going to have our Ko-Fi backers joining us live to throw questions at us on anything and everything that pops into their head. You should have had the link from Kenny on your email. So this is your last call to get those creative juices flowing and think up some really, really good howlers for us.
And if you're not yet a backer, it's not too late to get signed up for our next editorial meeting in January. You just need to hop over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and sign up for a monthly contribution. You can do it right now while you listen, or else you'll forget. I know what you're like.
Nag, nag, nag. And following listener feedback, Alex, we've agreed, haven't we, that we won't always hold sessions on weekday evenings. We'll mix it up a bit. We'll do some at a weekend or during lunch breaks to make sure as many people as possible get a chance to be involved with what we are co-creating with our listeners on Quiet Riot. And if you're not able to pay to play, do not worry. We get it. We understand. We love you anyway. Our recorded content will always be free of charge. And you can support us in many other ways. You can leave us a review, share our posts on social media. All of that good stuff is absolutely fine by us.
Right, let's crack on with today's show, Naomi. What shall we mull over? Obviously, there was a big speech by Starmer on Thursday, the day we put out our main episode, so we'd already recorded. So it would be good to talk about that today, I think.
Yeah, good shout. And it was a really wide-ranging speech, so lots for us to get into on that. But as ever, the elephant in the room was Brexit. So if you don't mind, I'd also like to talk about how to prod the government in the right direction on Europe. And related to that, I actually did manage to grab some time with Andrew Lewin, who's a Labour MP for Welwyn Hatfield.
Oh, I can't wait to listen.
Quiet Riot.
Now, on Thursday, the Prime Minister set out 6 milestones that he says will allow voters to hold his government to account in a major speech that many branded a relaunch, but Labour specifically did not want to brand a relaunch. Apparently, much to the confusion of most of the media, because who ever heard of having a mission and goals and milestones, other than anyone that's ever done any project management or had a small business. The targets cover the economy, house building, the NHS, policing, preschool education, and green energy. They were ambitious. One of them is debatable, whether it's ambitious, but that's rather esoteric. And he said that there was no point in setting your sights on achievements that will happen by default. And actually,
was that a pop at Sunak?
He cited Sunak's inflation target. actually as an example of the sort of thing that is meaningless. But he also took a swipe at the machine of government, which I thought was very interesting.
I don't think there's a swamp to be drained here, but I do think that too many people in Whitehall are comfortable in the tepid bath of managed decline. Now, I totally get that when trust in politics is so low, we must be careful about the promises we make. But across Whitehall and Westminster, that's been internalised as a don't say anything, don't try anything too ambitious, set targets that will happen anyway.
What do you think of that aspect of it, Naomi? Because a lot of Labour people that I've been speaking to the last few weeks have been echoing, very weirdly, the sentiment Dominic Cummings was right.
Well, you're a former civil servant, Alex. What do you think? Is it a bit flabby and slow and cumbersome and in need of reform?
Some of it is, I'm sure. I mean, I used to work for a non-government agency. They tend to be a lot more dynamic and basically run like NGOs, in effect. So they tend to be much more modern. I have to say, I did a short secondment to the Department of Trade that seemed to be much slower moving. And then I spent a tiny bit of time at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that seemed lost in a different century. I mean, people still bowed to the Queen as they came in the door of the office. There's
Did you have to do that?
No, but there's a portrait of the Queen above every door on the inside. And as you come into the office, you turn and bow. So some of it, yes, it is quite sclerotic. I don't know whether, because all these things are a habit, you know. So what I don't know is whether the civil service got into the habit of resisting mad ideas that came from government, because there was so much churn of ministers. And that really does something, you know. Like if you're in the housing bit.
And you've had 8 million housing ministers.
And you've had 18 housing ministers. Yeah. You learn to ignore them. You learn to go, there'll be a different guy in 6 weeks' time with a different plan. So basically, you learn to play for time.
Yeah.
And maybe what we're seeing is that muscle memory from that last 14 years where people have failed to maybe internalize the fact that there is now a different government with a huge majority. It will be in place for the next 5 years, and it does have a plan to implement. And maybe they need to snap out of that sense of ministers come and ministers go.
That's a good point. I think much as we often on this show say, look, you can't talk about the BBC. It is not a monolith. It is a series of monoliths. And BBC News is really quite different from some of the programming and certainly radio sections of the BBC. I think the same is true of the civil service. And I think some departments are culturally incredibly different to other ones and tend to attract more dynamic managers and leaders and fast streamers, etc., than others do. And you'll hear that when you speak to civil servants that have jumped ship from one department to another, you know, saying, I just had to get out of FCDO, or I just had to get out of wherever, and I'm now much happier at Home Office or DEFRA or wherever they've gone to. So I've never been a civil servant, and I can't actually imagine a job I'd be worse at.
I think you'd be a really good civil servant, actually. But yeah, but that's what I also found interesting, that he was careful not to be antagonistic. So he said quite explicitly, I don't think there's a swamp to drain here. And I really liked this analysis that Westminster and Whitehall have internalized the trauma of the last few years as being risk averse. And that translates into do nothing, say nothing, keep your head down.
If you're working for ministers who did take the Mingvar's approach to the election campaign, you may assume that they too have that approach now that they're in government. So, yeah, perhaps it's all just an adjustment period and the civil service will begin to find its dynamism for this new government soon.
And also, obviously, you know, we'll get to talk about that in the next part, but to be saying all of that while at the same time kind of carefully avoiding the issue of Europe, there is a little bit of an irony there, isn't there?
Indeedy. Now, about a day before the big Starmer speech, there was a poll out from a company called Find Out Now. It was a voting intention poll. This is a registered British Polling Council pollster, and the sample size was decent, 2,500 voters, but it put Labour in third, behind Reform in second, and the Tories in first place. Now, Alex, you will be the first to point out that this is potentially an outlier, that the aggregate poll of polls still puts Labour ahead in first place, albeit down from where they were at the election. But it does seem to have woken up those who were pessimistic about how the government have handled the first few months into, no, guys, this is going really badly now. We've got to do something. What is your sense among the political commentariat, but also Labour itself, about the direction of travel with the polls?
I mean, there are a lot of mixed signals, okay? Like, weirdly, disapproval of Starmer has fallen a few points since the farming protests. There are now fewer people who disapprove of him, but there are also fewer people who approve of him. So his approval rating is negative but improving, if that makes sense. But then on the other hand, I look at, there's a really interesting thing happening in Scotland. Like, Yes has gained quite a few points of no to Scottish independence. Several polls now have them 49 to 50, with No just ahead. And it is after the election that happens.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether disappointment in Starmer is feeding that, whether Scottish people feel, well, actually, they're all much of a muchness. It doesn't matter who's in charge in Westminster, they don't look after our interests. So that, I think, is something quite important to keep an eye on. We were chatting about this last night over drinks, and you are, I think, slightly less enamored of the approach. What do you think?
It's because of that poll and what I hear in my own polling work and listening to voters on the daily, as I do for my day job, that I desperately want Labour to turn things around. And they have to, because the stakes are so high. I want to see the xenophobic, toxic English nationalism of Farage and his cabal defeated, and roundly. I don't want Trumpism in Britain. I look at where social democratic leaders around the world are suffering. So this isn't a uniquely Starmer problem. It is not a uniquely British problem at all. And they can turn it around. If we look back to the 1980s, the Conservatives were polling really badly, but they did win in 1983 and 1987, albeit the Falkland War helped. And the new Labour machine then really turned things around after those defeats and was excellent at messaging. Previously, the Tories had been far superior, bringing in advertising executives and marketing gurus to help draft their comms. And the Blair Project really turned that around for Labour, and they copied much of that. And the current Labour comms just isn't where it needs to be to turn things around. It feels muddled and like it's a listicle approach to delivering. We had Labour's 5 missions in opposition. We now have 6 milestones, 3 foundations, and 6 first steps. And what they need is passion and storytelling, and most of all, delivery. And I'm a chartered management accountant. I love talking about performance management and what are your lead indicators on whether you're delivering on your strategy, but they tend to need to be internal. They're not what you're communicating to your customer about your product and why they should buy it and why your product is superior. And I really enjoyed John Harris's Guardian article last week, which was published before the Starmer speech. And he reminded readers of the excellent 2007 book, The Political Brain. I don't know if you've read it, Alex. It's by a psychologist called Drew Weston. And he kind of wrote that Republicans have become much better at connecting with voters than Democrats, because when reason and emotion collide, emotion invariably wins. And the right is just so much more skilled on this terrain. And they tell, simple, human-focused stories, while the left recite facts and figures. And we rehashed this in the wake of the 2016 referendum, where the big numbers didn't cut through, but the emotional storytelling about the state of the NHS and horrible migrants coming to take your jobs did. I desperately want this government to succeed. It's from that point that I'm starting, for sure. I'm worried about the sort of command and control centralized approach and model that the very term missions speaks to.
You see, I think the problem is attitudinal rather than capability. Labour came into government, and I think what threw them was how quickly, basically, sentiment, the press, everyone turned against them. I think they expected to have slightly more time. Some mistakes that they made contributed to that, and they are understandable mistakes. So saying as quickly as possible that they were going to withdraw the winter fuel allowance is the right thing to do, because you can't drop it on people just as the weather is getting colder and people start using their heating in the budget. If you see what I mean, you have to do it earlier. But that was the first little thing that began to turn people against them. And the riots, even though I thought Starmer handled them exceptionally well, when you have the entirety of the press basically screaming that it's all your fault, and then the prisons crisis, which was entirely the previous government's, but again, you have the entire press corps pointing the finger saying you did this. And so I think that's the bit that took them by surprise. It's naive thinking back on it, because a government should never come in thinking, okay, now we stop communicating what we're doing and we just get cracking with doing it, and then hopefully people will see the results, which is plainly the vibe of this government, right? Everything about Starmer says people have had enough of words and they want to see actions. Okay, but actions take time to materialize. And in that intervening period, you
need a lot of
have to
words.
communicate exactly what you're doing. And that's the bit they're really bad at. And like I said, I think it's attitudinal. I don't think it's a lack of capability.
And it has got a lot harder to communicate with people. We aren't consuming news in the same way as, say, when Blair had his pledge card back in 97. We have a highly fragmented news. We have social media hoovering up a lot of people's time and attention. And there just isn't the daily, everyone sits down to watch the 6 o'clock news lifestyle of days gone by. You've got it at the touch of your fingertip on your mobile phone, should you want to tap into the news. So I do sense a frustration from Starmer. He's like, I know I need to speak to the British public. They need to hear from their Prime Minister. But I'm actually not sure how many people tuned in at all to this speech or the write-ups of it. And that is deeply difficult. I'm not saying it's not very much harder to do it now than previously.
I thought Thursday was a very good start, actually, because what it did is it grabbed the agenda of political journalists by the scruff of the neck. And they may all have been bitching about it, or some of them saying this isn't the right thing to do, but they were talking about the thing Labour wanted them to talk about. And that is very, very different from all of them going off in all kinds of directions like feral cats and sort of making up their own front page story about glasses or Angela Rayner's flat or whatever. The point is, they were all taking their agenda line from Labour, even if they were criticising it. And I think that's a really good start. The government is in a position where it has dominance over the agenda. It can set the topic for the day, and it needs to do that every single day. It doesn't matter if the vast majority of journalists dislike or like what you're doing. They need to be talking about the thing you want them to be talking about. I thought Starmer was really quite explicit in what he tried to do in that speech. He actually said it. He says this is neither the lack of ambition that we saw under Sunak, nor the sort of insane pace of Truss wanting to do everything yesterday, nor the empty boosterism of Johnson. So he's trying to carve a path between those things.
I understand all of that. I do understand all of that. However, it's the what they are saying and the sort of technocratic language of it that I think does not set voters' hearts on fire.
Well, you say technocratic, I say business.
Okay, but as I said earlier, when business talks about project management, it doesn't talk to its customers about that. Like,
No, that's true. That's true.
We brought this product to market by having a very rigorous feedback loop internally, and we held people to account on delivery and blah, 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 blah.
You're right, actually. It's talking internally. It's talking still to itself.
It's communicating externally, something that should be talked about in Whitehall and with civil servants. I worry, therefore, that the comms around it, it's not the lack of comms, it's the words themselves. When we looked at the farmer demonstrations, of course, you had all of the awful Farage clerks and peacocking around it, but the farmers themselves that were speaking at it were making these very emotional pleas to the crowd about the hours that they worked and how sometimes their own hands would even bleed doing whatever they were doing with machinery and milking cows and cutting wheat and all that sort of stuff. And we are human and we share empathy when we hear those kinds of stories. And we don't when we hear a manager saying, this is a target that will be met by this date and it will begin with this round of performance management review. So you're right, totally, on the grabbing the agenda and making the media listen and seizing the narrative for what they want to talk about. It's the words within the narrative that I think do need to change.
Having said all of this, clearly there needs to be a huge improvement made. Plainly, it was a mistake to stop campaigning. They should never have stopped campaigning. You saw it. It was visible. They got into government and thought, okay, we're here now. We don't need to keep pushing the narrative. We can get on with doing the job. That was plainly a mistake. The only thing that gives me a little bit of hope, as it were, is the fact that I saw a lecture by Obama. He was saying that there are 4 areas where people notice money spent, and they are transport and infrastructure projects in general, health, education, and policing. He said those are the areas with which voters come into contact all the time. Not political speeches, not Twitter, all those things are fringe aspects of actually what goes on in real life. In real life, people see what's happening to their school every day when they drop their kids off at the gate. They know how quickly they can get an appointment with their GP and an operation on the NHS. They know whether they see bobbies on the beat and whether when something happens, it gets investigated. And they know the roads they travel on, the trains being on time.
Actually, that's the one, Alex. You don't, unless you're very unfortunate, have to see your GP every day or every week or even every month. And you really hopefully don't have to have a hospital appointment every month either. But every day, the vast majority of people have to drive somewhere, catch the bus, catch the train, cycle somewhere. And transport really is the huge one. And that's where I would really love to see the government investing far more, particularly around the country and not just in the southeast.
But everything they announced on Thursday is around those areas.
I remember homelessness in the mid-90s being horrific.
Oh, yeah.
And then I remember very soon after 97, you just did not have the volume of street sleepers that you'd had previously. We did see during the pandemic, even a Conservative government eradicating, albeit very temporarily, homelessness. And I think now it is far worse than it's ever been. And people notice that every day too. And I really hope that that is another thing that we see disappearing, because I had a friend over from Madrid who hasn't been back for a while. They did go to university here. And that is the thing that has shocked them the most. Where have all these people come from? Why is it almost every street in central and suburban London that I've been going around visiting people while I've been over on my trip? I've never seen anything like it. So, there are very visible signifiers to a country's prosperity, and that is there for the world to see when they come here.
It's so interesting you say that, because I'm now taking what I just said and applying it to my memory of post-97, between 97 and 2000, I would say. And the things I remember are there was a school across the road from where I lived at the time that used to have to do classes in metal storage containers. Yeah. And that all disappeared, and they had a new building built within that first year of a Labour government. What I remember was the constant stories that preceded 97 of people sleeping in gurneys in hospital corridors. Those disappeared, and there was a huge investment in that. And actually, satisfaction with the NHS was at sky-high levels during that period. And the third thing I remember is the London Underground and buses improving significantly during that period. So it's true that those are the things that have stayed with me. And they were rewarded with 2 more terms. So, as I said, it's not irrecoverable, but they need to pull their finger out and start telling the story of what it is they're doing so that people understand it.
And one of those stories needs to be about our relationship with Europe. Quiet Riot. Today's episode is sponsored by the wonderful people at Shopify. Alex, do you recognise that sound?
I can't say that I do.
Well, it is the sound of a sale on Shopify. I've been using Shopify for years to power the Best for Britain shop, and it's got me thinking that we definitely need to use Shopify for selling Quiet Riot merch.
Oh, and we're getting there, aren't we? We're very close to getting our first Quiet Riot merchandise up and running. I've seen some early designs. It feels like everyone but me has a side hustle nowadays. I don't even have a Substack.
Exactly. And Shopify, it just sort of like takes all of the hassle out of selling things. I don't know what we'd do without it at Best for Britain, because it's an all-in-one commerce platform. You don't need to learn any tricky coding or faff around with the back end of your website. It's very much plug and play, and it just works. And it means that you can just get on with selling things quickly, easily, and cost effectively.
I mean, for a small company like us, there's only the 3 of us. That's me sold, because the last thing I want to be doing is trying to manage yet another process. And I like the idea that Shopify can help you get selling across other marketplaces like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, not just your own site. Because I think that actually there is the potential for our merchandise to go viral. You know, I really feel it in my bones, especially our range of Christmas jumpers. I think they will do very, very well. Plus, I hear that, unlike us, Shopify have won awards. And with an extensive business course library, they're just there ready to support a business in every way they need.
Quiet Riot listeners, Shopify want to help you to get selling as well. So they've got an incredible deal. You can sign up for a £1 only trial month at shopify.co.uk/Quiet Riot. That's all lowercase.
So go to shopify.co.uk/Quiet Riot to take your business to the next level today.
Quiet Riot. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I did a short interview with Andrew Lewin yesterday. Andrew took his seat from Grant Shapps in July, Welwyn and Hatfield. I would say he's definitely a one-to-watch figure within Labour circles. He's a passionate pro-European. He set up a group called Remain Labour during the campaign in the referendum. And he has now taken on, I'm very excited to say, chairing Best for Britain's UK Trade and Business Commission. And that was previously headed up by Hilary Benn. Andrew and I talked about the work of the Trade and Business Commission and some very juicy Best for Britain YouGov polling that we published yesterday that was all around voter attitudes towards the USA and the EU when it comes to who we trust, who we think are allies, and who we should be doing trade with. Here it is. Welcome to your Quiet Riot debut, MP for Welwyn Hatfield, Andrew Lewin.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here.
Andrew, I believe you've come fresh from the mega session of TUV MP Jim Allister's bill, trying to sort of tear up the Windsor framework. How was it?
That's right. I wouldn't describe myself as feeling fresh after 5 hours non-stop in the chamber. But look, it was really important that this bill was rejected because it, as you say, it sought to disapply the Windsor framework, would have been a conflict of our requirements under international law and a huge step backwards. I tell you what was most striking. Jim and others on the unionist benches were referring to our, quote, surrender to the European Union. Jim talked about the European Union as colonisers, so just extraordinary language. And I was very pleased that we had a good showing on the Labour benches, that we confronted them, took the argument on, and that bill is going to go no further.
Well done. And I bet you are kind of shattered now. So thank you very much for joining us for Sunday School Quiet Riot. Listeners who are familiar with Best for Britain, I know that we act as secretariat to the UK Trade and Business Commission, which is a group of cross-parliamentary, cross-industry leaders who, a bit like a select committee, take evidence on how to improve our trade deals. Most importantly, of course, the Tories' absolutely disastrous Brexit trade deal with the EU. And for 3 years, it was headed up by Hilary Benn MP before he got elevated to Secretary of State. And now, Andrew, you have picked up the baton. What is it about the deal that needs fixing?
Well, first of all, just to say, look, I'm delighted to be involved. It's a real honour to be the chair, and I have very big shoes to fill with respect to Hilary Benn, and I will do my very best. And I just want to say it is a great privilege to be doing this with other Labour colleagues, cross-party colleagues, figures with huge experience of business and working within the European Union. So I think this is a really important project. Look, so much needs to change, but I think we have to start with the big picture, which is that this Parliament will be defined, in my view, by our success or not in growing the economy and raising living standards. And it is very clear to me that we as a Labour government have to look at every single lever that we can pull to deliver on that mission of growing our economy. And a big way to realise that is by significantly improving our relationship with the European Union in so many ways. Very happy to talk detail. I think dynamic alignment, the Commission in the last Parliament did a lot of important work on this. The longer we've been outside the European Union, the more divergence has occurred. And that means the harder it's been for some businesses to flourish here. And so I think looking at dynamic alignment would be one of my very first priorities. But there's an awful lot to do. You
talked about the Labour government's ambition for growth, for easing the cost of living crisis that so many people are struggling with at the moment. How do you feel that the reset of the relationship is going so far, and what are you really hoping to see from the next year?
Well, look, for the first time in 11 years, I'm hopeful. I was reflecting back on when it was that David Cameron first made his speech promising the in-out referendum. That was January 2013. Crumbs,
we've been at this for a long time, haven't we, Andrew?
Yeah, and I didn't have grey hairs then, but I do have a few now. I'm going to entirely blame Brexit, but it's certainly part of it. But look, there is a serious point here. For the first time since then, we have a government that's stated objective, and I'm proud, is to have a stronger and closer working relationship with the European Union, our largest trading partner. That in of itself is significant and a huge step forward. All the mood music has been optimistic. I think significant that the Chancellor referenced the importance of the relationship with the EU in her Mansion House speech just a couple of weeks ago. The Prime Minister has consistently talked about the reset from the dispatch box as one of his priorities at PMQs and at other times. So it's a very good start, but now I want to help play a role with the Commission in working on the detail and seeing if we can help quicken the pace as well.
Absolutely. It cannot come soon enough. But one major political event has, of course, happened since Labour got that big victory back in July, and that is Trump winning the presidency in the US and now threatening to bring tariffs against lots of trading partners, but, certainly hasn't ruled out Europe and potentially even the UK. Do you think those threats and that rhetoric from him has helped or hindered the prospects of the UK improving the deal with the EU?
I think it's put it up the agenda, certainly with the media, and that I'm coming to this debate from the the urgent need to strengthen that relationship and make progress is no bad thing. I'm not sure anyone, perhaps even the president-elect himself, knows exactly what he's going to do on tariffs. What I would say is, whoever was going to be in the White House from January next year, it doesn't take away from the reality that the EU is comfortably our biggest trading partner, and that we need that more effective relationship in order to grow our economy at home. So look, you're absolutely right. There's been lots written about Trump and tariffs, and there will continue to be. But the fact that it's driven it up the agenda and perhaps just gently reminded people of the importance of our relationship with those 27 member states on our doorstep, who we do most of our trading with, is actually no bad thing at all.
Well, in Blue Peter style, here's one I prepared earlier. Best of Britain has just published some polling that shows double the number of voters think improving trade with the EU should be a priority over a trade deal with the USA. That's 44% to 19%. And Andrew, I know you've had a look at this polling. Why do you think that is? Why do people so strongly favour that proximity value of trade with Europe over the US?
I think it's really striking polling. Personally, I think it's because the Leave Remain binary divide that dominated our politics for so long has gone in the minds of most voters. I don't think many people consider themselves Leavers or Remainers anymore. They consider themselves people who are living in an economy which has been flatlining for more than a decade, and want to look at every practical step to get things growing and moving again. And look, I found that in the general election, there were unquestionably people who had voted Leave, but were now willing to vote Labour and enthusiastically wanting to vote Labour. And I've never hid and never would hide the fact that I campaigned to Remain and am by definition a pro-European. But they've moved beyond those badges, and they want to see something change. And I think it provides a real opportunity for this government. And perhaps I'm skipping ahead, but we've both seen the polling which says that the support is even greater amongst those Labour switchers who switched from the Conservatives in 2019 to the Labour Party in July this year. That feels really significant.
No, that really stood out from the polling for me. And listeners, just so you're aware, this is a poll of more than 4,000 people. So when you typically see a generic poll, it's usually a sample of somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. So we did double to try and get a big enough sample to be able to look into some of these, what we call cross breaks. And it is really interesting. The people who voted Conservative in 2019 and then switched to back people like Andrew in 2024, voting Labour, are more emphatic about their support for EU than the average voter. 72% want to prioritise the EU compared to just 66% of the average. It sounds like, Andrew, that doesn't surprise you, and that when you were canvassing ahead of the general election that you were finding those switch voters. Do you think there were other issues, and presumably there were many other issues than just Brexit and the impact of that in terms of winning them back over towards Labour?
Of course. I mean, just quickly, I would say that I think it's an invitation to be brave to this Labour government, which I'm very proud to be a part of from the backbenches, because there was a time a few years ago where I think, some colleagues for understandable reasons might have been nervous about talking about strengthening our relationship or closer ties because of a perceived electoral risk and negative impact. I think this polling, is really compelling. There are other polls out there which show a very similar picture, that we have moved beyond that. So speaking as a Labour MP, my message to colleagues is you no longer need to be concerned about being badged as a Remainer or a Ramona, because that's not where the public is at all. And as we see, the people that delivered a Labour majority were even more likely to say, now's the time to have a stronger relationship. Look, on your broader question, of course, there's a host of reasons why I'm, have the privilege to be sitting chatting to you as the Labour MP for Welling Hatfield. First time we've had a Labour MP for 19 years in my patch, but central to that was the economy. It is what the last government was measured on, a conviction amongst so many people that they were not better off after 14 years of the Conservative government. And they are going to ask that same question of us in 5 years' time, and they're absolutely right to.
Well, the polling also asked people who they trusted. So we asked people, which of the following countries and blocks of countries do you trust most? And which of them share our values? And 66% think that the UK and the EU share similar values, whereas it's only 50% with the USA and 49% to 30% saying that they trust the EU and the USA. What is it for you personally that makes you align with European values in the same way as it sounds like many, many voters do?
It's a really good question. And do you know what? I would be fascinated, to mull on what that poll might have said 6 months ago when...
Pre-Trump, yeah.
Exactly. Because I suspect pre-Trump, that would have been pretty level pegging to the US and the European Union. We're all long-standing democracies. The vast majority of those member states have been members of NATO. We have a common concern about the rise of Putin, China, Iran working together. Trump's election has probably caused people to pause here and think, what does that mean about America? And look, in the long term, I'm still very hopeful for America, but it's quite understandable. That's where people are today. We can't forget our deep ties to the European Union, and it traverses everything, doesn't it? From it's the destination people in this country are most likely to go on holiday. It is, if you run a small business that operates in a country that's not just the United Kingdom, you're most likely to do trade with a member of the European Union. There are those links that affect us all in different ways, and it's what I call the essential relationship, really, between the UK and the European Union.
Lovely. I agree wholeheartedly. And my values are those that are very much aligned to the EU. I think yours are too. The, ability for us to share knowledge, to be able to traverse borders, to work together in a collaborative spirit, to uphold the values of international liberal democracy and the rule of law. Those are themselves coming under some threat from within the EU, I think it would be fair to say. But certainly, if we're there with them, making the case for all of those values and upholding them, I think the world will end up a better place. And we do know that the EU was sort of born out of centuries of war on, I think, the most murderous continent in human history. Europe has loved a war, and the EU brought us all together to trade with one another and put an end to much of that. So long may those values continue to flourish. Andrew Lewin, thank you so much for joining us today, and do come back on Quiet Riot again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Naomi. That polling is fascinating, isn't it? Not least because of kind of zeroing in on exactly who was it that switched to Labour from the Conservatives at the last election, and how pro-European they are than even the average voter. Listeners, we have a call to action for you, which is unusual for a Sunday. You need to share that polling with your MP. And Best for Britain has made that very, very easy with their Ask Your MP app. You can basically do it at the touch of a button, and we'll drop a link in the show notes.
Yep, your MP needs to know that while we do not have to choose between the EU and the US, we do need to prioritise, and the EU comes first, because when it comes to trade, proximity matters. So you can head to bestforbritain.org/back_EU_trade. You pop your postcode in and send the polling straight to your MP for a bit of Christmas break reading. And as Alex said, we'll leave a link to that in the show notes. Quiet Riot.
Today, the Notre Dame has reopened its doors for the first time with a Sunday Mass attended by many, many world leaders, and apparently the setting for various Trump bilaterals with the Georgian president and with Zelensky, all organized by Macron. Naomi, you're rather taken by the whole project, aren't you?
Well, I do love a good news story.
Yeah.
Kind of getting a reputation for myself on that front. And while I am a humanist, I do agree God has all the best houses. And one of the most beautiful and iconic is, of course, Notre Dame de Paris. And it looks resplendent following that absolutely horrific blaze. In no small part, thanks to the huge sums raised around the world to fund all of that work, which had to cover everything: structural work, organ restoration, exquisite and painstaking artwork, but all completed within Macron's stated deadline of 5 years. I think it's probably technically 5.5 years, but it is no mean feat. And if we sort of cast our minds back to April the 15th, 2019, the fire broke out just before 7 p.m. We still don't know exactly what lit the touch paper. It could have been electrical issues, cigarettes being smoked by workers that were putting up some scaffolding. And within an hour, the spire collapsed and many Parisians were gathering and watching in horror. Minutes later, the whole roof collapsed. The Paris firefighters did a huge heroic effort, risking their lives to create a wall of water to prevent the flames reaching the really magnificent western facade. But they say that the temperatures of the heat inside the cathedral peaked at 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, for reference, the lead on the roof would have started melting at about 621 degrees Fahrenheit. They got it all under control by about 4 a.m. and I think it was totally extinguished by 9:30, so like 14 hours later. And it's this incredible building, and was first originally constructed in 1163 and completed in about 1345. So to completely restore it within 5.5 years is remarkable. Meanwhile, in the exact same month of the exact same year, in a European capital city not that far away, London, some cracks appeared in Hammersmith Bridge. And it has remained closed to vehicles since 2020 with no major work starting on it.
Oh, I shouldn't laugh, but that really is hilarious. They managed to rebuild the whole of the Notre Dame. And we haven't filled in the cracks. Oh dear. Can I tell you something about the Notre Dame? So the historian had created a 3D model of the inside, and I really love that aspect of the story of how technology sort of went hand in hand with very, very traditional restoration and historical craftsmanship that went into it. This 3D modeling of the inside, and drone footage was used, and artificial intelligence to reconstruct the outside in immense detail. And I love that aspect of it. It's wonderful, I think.
Quiet riot. Okay, let's go from the sublime to the ridiculous with some rather shiny Christmas presents that have caught your eye, Alex. Patriotic baubles, I hear. Come on, tell us more.
So, Melania Trump. I mean, I don't have words for how inappropriate this is, really. She's on Fox and Friends hawking Christmas baubles.
So, Melania, you got the new season of your ornaments. Tell us about it.
So these are the ornaments that they are available this season. This is the third season that I design, and they are very special. For example, Lady Liberty, it was inspiration from my necklace that I bought when I was modeling in Paris. And now we have an ornament, and we have also a necklace that it's available on melaniatrump.com.
Beautiful.
These are awesome. These are fantastic.
They're very patriotic this year. As you could see, it's all red, white, and blue.
Is this her side hustle?
It's her side. It's on melaniatrump.com. And this is like cheap tat. You can see it's very, very thin, very badly made, probably made in China. It uses a gold term that I had to look up. it was like gold something. And I looked it up, and it's actually silver with a very thin layer of gold on top of it. And like I said, very thin, very cheaply made. And they're $60 a piece. But they're patriotic. They're all in red, white, and blue. And one of them has Lady Liberty in it and all of that. Basically, tat. Pound shop tat. Hawked by the First Lady-elect. And at the same time, Trump has new fragrances coming out.
Oh my God. Well, what's he called? What's he called? Is it a play on the word musk?
No, it's Fight, 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 it's called. His new fragrance. I mean, I don't know if it's only in a British context that the idea of Trump fragrances doesn't sound very appealing anyway. It retails at a snap of $199.
Oh God.
$200 to smell like Trump. And all of them, the other thing I wanted to say is all of them include, and I quote, the option of a digital collectible.
What? What?
Yeah, you get a sort of non-fungible token thingy. A nice, I guess, GIF of the Christmas bauble, or you get an electronic. You can't have an electronic smell, so I don't know. I don't know what the digital collectible is when it comes to Trump's. I mean, probably his signature or something like that. What a hustle!
Does it say what notes are in the fragrance? Do we know if it's got like undertones of?
It's a bold fragrance, apparently. Designed for men who embody strength and resilience. It doesn't say what notes. I mean, I don't know. Divorce and failure? Do they have a particular smell?
I'm on Fragrantica. It's getting a perfume rating of 2.2 out of 5.
Oh, that's not great, is it?
That's not great.
Yeah.
No, I've got the fragrance notes here.
Okay.
Fougère accord.
What?
That is the green, herb, and fougère.
That's no clear.
And similar scents are Zara's Azure Wave and Camille Rochelle Red Desire pour Homme.
Okay, there you go. So now you know. And that's it for this week's Quiet. We hope you're already done with your Christmas shopping, or at least are not tempted, because I have the feeling, like if I had unlimited money, I would be buying loads of that as joke presents. Like if I had loads of money, I would be giving everyone fight. Anyway, that's it for this week's Quiet Riot Sunday School. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to our gorgeous listeners for tuning in. Don't forget, write to your MP about that EU polling.
Right. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, folks, and we'll see some of you tomorrow and all of you later in the week.
We love you lots. Bye for now.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou, and produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu, and edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Where I am, I'm working like a ass my ass off. I know. Christmas stuff that, who gives a about Christmas stuff and decoration, but I need to do it, right?
Yeah, but 100%. You have no choice.
And then I do it, and I say that I'm working on Christmas, planning for the Christmas, and they said, oh, what about the children? They were separated. Give me a break.
Huge thanks to today's sponsor, Shopify, and remember to sign up for a £1 trial period at shopify.co.uk/quietriot, all lowercase.